And I must say that it's a real honor for me to introduce our final keynote speaker in this conference, Mrs. Nora Milotay. And throughout her career, education has been the main theme, both as a teacher herself, a researcher, and a policy advisor. And for the past year, she's been one of the key players in ECC on the European level. At this point, she is a policy analyst at the European Parliamentary Research Service, focusing on social policy. But for many of us, the name Milotay always rings a bell in terms of the European Quality Framework on ECC. This quality framework dates back to 2014, contains statements of the most relevant and urgent issues in ECC today, and it is illustrated with many inspiring practices and supported by a lot of scientific research evidence. It has been used now by several member states in shaping national ECC policies, and it's also been used quite a lot as training material. And I think this document remains one of the most inspiring sources in the debate on what is going on in ECC today. Also, throughout her work, Nora always managed to keep an eye out for the relevant links between practice, research, and policy. And today as well, in her new function, she applies her passion for ECC in the advisory work towards the members of parliament in the European Parliament, placing the issue of ECC in a broader social policy context. In her keynote today, Ms. Milotay will bring us the European perspective in touching upon some of the challenges in our current societies marked by super diversity, and how ECC, with its innovative practices and innovative approaches sometimes, can deliver important expertise in looking for ways to respond to the challenges in our societies today. So I'm not going to take any more of her time and give the floor to Nora. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anki, and thank you to everybody. I really feel very honored that I am invited to this conference to give the closing keynote. It's really an honor, both as personally and professionally. So thank you very much for your trust. And I really think that these 2.5 days in which I have really tried to participate, not only come to give the keynote, I really think it was very, very intensive, extremely interesting. So I really hope that the way I would like to close it will summarize a lot of your discussions. And also I'm hoping that it will show you some steps that you could take in the future in the field. At least that would be my aim. And because I think these were rather long and tiring 2 days, I would first brought you a little surprise to start my presentation with, which will be a little journey. A 2-minute journey. You just have to stay with me for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And then I will explain to you what the journey is about. So first, I just want to show it to you. I was trying to look at your faces. Some of you were looking, thinking, what on earth is this all about? But I could at least definitely see some surprise on your faces. And I'm sure you are wondering why I tried to show you that film. I really think that it brings to mind many of the key words that I would like to use in my presentation. By the way, it's a music composed by a British composer, David Fenshaw, and it's a combination of Western music and African music. And I think you have seen the idea of how these two types of music can become actually very coherent. So some of the key themes I would like to talk about is, if it's working, is innovation, because it's an innovative way of making music. It is also disruptive, so I also want to talk to you about disruption. And of course, it is diverse, so I will also talk to you about diversity. And finally, it has become coherent. It was a coherent piece, so we will also talk about coherence. So it's innovation, disruption, diversity, and coherence. These are the key themes that I would like to address in my keynote. And of course, I will talk about education. And what is the aim, what we really want to achieve in education these days? Or always, actually. We would like to maximize human potential. We would like to facilitate a vibrant, participative democracy. We would like to enhance skills. And we would like to bring this to all people. And what we seem to actually struggle with, that we don't manage to bring it to everyone. And this we could see in all our conversations, that we said, let's focus on the individual, because still many, many children are actually underserved. And why does this happen? We know so much. We have so much research. We have so many wonderful practices, and still it doesn't seem to work. So, or not for everybody. So, what kind of solutions could we find? And this is why I would like to talk about a very important topic that we always mention, we always say it's very important, but we actually don't like to talk about it, which is governance. And how do we govern a competent system where innovation is actually possible, and it really brings results for everybody for whom we would like to bring results. My presentation will have 3 parts. In the first part, I would like to talk to you about innovation, particularly about disruptive innovation. I will explain to you, of course, what that is, and how I think early childhood education and care has not only the potential to have disruptive innovation within its own system, but it is also able to disrupt the existing education system, I mean in the first place, the school system. Secondly, I would like to talk about what kind of governance needs to be in place so that this disruptive innovation can happen, and that innovation remains sustainable. And the third topic I will talk about is how the European policy arena, given that I am a European policymaker, can facilitate this process. On the next slide, I will just try to show you how much, just from the current governance system, we can understand that there is already a general understanding that early childhood is very important for education. We say this, but this is also more and more reflected in the governance system in Europe. And on this map, you can see the 2 basic types of systems: the unitary system, where the whole phase of early childhood, 0 to compulsory school age, is under 1 ministry, and the split system, when it's generally under 2 ministries. When it is under 1 ministry, it's always the education ministry, except for Germany. where it's the family affairs ministry, but it's still one ministry. And in other countries, it is generally for the younger children, social, family affairs, and for the older, education. And you can also see that there are some systems where it is mixed. That means that certain parts of the early childhood service are already organized in one phase, let's say the curriculum or the training for the staff, but the rest isn't, or the children are in separate settings. But the main message of this is that more and more countries put the whole governance under the auspices of the education ministries. And this is what I would like to emphasize. So how is innovation possible in these systems? First, to explain that, I would spend a moment explaining what actually innovation means. Innovation is something, it's a novelty. It's an adoption of that novelty in a system. It brings, hopefully, new outcomes and also new processes in place. It is very important that it is not a linear process. It is an interaction among existing knowledge, research, invention, the markets, public administration, private businesses. It is also very important that because of that, many, many players are present. So it's companies, research institutes, public administration, and all sorts of intermediary organizations. And then lastly, there are also the governments. This is a tricky question, what the role of government is in innovation, because we find very often that governments can be actually an obstacle to innovation. But let's say we know that, that in many countries at the same time, governments create national innovation strategies. So still, I would say government, with a question mark, is still a very important part of innovation, of the innovation process. Now, I said I would like to talk to you about a certain type of innovation, which is disruptive innovation. The idea of disruptive innovation comes from the business world. It was really defined by an American scholar who is at the Harvard Business School, who is called Clayton Christensen, and who wrote several books about this, and basically who defines a disruptive innovation as a process in which a new market or value network is created that eventually disrupts the existing market and can even displace it. To give you an example completely from the, let's say first from the digital world, from the business world, but I will then give you also examples from the education world. So first, for instance, the first Apple personal computers, the first models were actually toys for children. At the time, the main, let's say the mainstream market produced very expensive mini computers. And of course there were people who couldn't access that because it was very expensive and also very sophisticated. So in order to satisfy, let's say, those who couldn't consume those mini computers and who also couldn't use them, these toy computers were very good. These toy computers were cheaper and were easier to use. And then let's say we can say in the front plane we had the mini computers. They were the main leaders of the market, and in the back plane we had the Apple computers, which of course didn't serve the same public. And then little by little, these personal computers could do more and more, but still cheaper. And slowly, they pushed out the mini computers from the main market. So disruptive innovation is really about as I said, creating a new value network and then displacing or even overtaking the existing one. What are the main characteristics of it? Maybe before I say that, so it's a two-stage process. So first, you have something which is a bit outside the existing system, and then slowly, the second stage, it takes over the existing one. The main characteristics are that they serve non-consumption. So I was telling you it is for those who cannot afford the mini computer. It is affordable, convenient, and simple. So it is much more accessible for those who cannot access the main market. They generate resources. They generate resources that are initially unattractive to the competitors. So actually, the main market, the mini computer producers, they weren't interested in that public that Apple was originally serving. So there was no competition. And this gave also then room for Apple to develop its own computer better. I left out the third one, sorry, that it can create systemic change. So originally it's on the edge of the market, later it takes over. And finally, it is often ignored or even encouraged by the existing market because they don't pay attention to the clients which this new product will serve. So how does this correspond to early childhood education and care? We know that my example came from the business world and very much related to the private sector. And of course, education is the public domain. And innovation generally happens within the public domain, and it's very difficult. We know the inertia of the education system. We always talk about it. We try to find the reasons for it. But actually, it is possible to innovate to a certain extent, but then after a while, the system becomes so complicated and so expensive that also blocks actually further innovation in the system. So what can be done? What I would like to say is that maybe movements like early childhood education and care, that is a bit outside the formal education system, can bring in, like the mini computers, new things to the existing education system, to the school system. And of course, I will explain to you how. Now, one of the biggest challenges that we talk about in education is inequalities and how to address poverty. And just to give you a few numbers, you know that we say that now in Europe still 1 in 4 children are at risk of poverty when we consider it or calculate it according to disposable income. But actually, there is a recent study that I think actually really wonderful one done by the UNICEF Innocenti Center, which looks at poverty from a multidimensional perspective, from access to health, to nutrition, to housing, to education, to information, to leisure, etc., in the rich countries. So not in Africa, but really in the European countries, in the Americas, etc. And it says that 1 in 3 children in the rich countries don't have access to at least 2 of those, even in non-poor families. So even in families that according to the income levels would be not considered as poor. So this is a very good illustration that I think many of your that there is much more awareness of actually in the early childhood field, that you need integrated services, that you need multi-agency work, and you do this much more in the early childhood field than in the school field. In the school field, a lot is preached about it, but very little is done about it. And it's exactly because it is very standardized, very regulated, and it just had to already satisfy so many goals in the last 100 or 200 years since we have that big education system for everyone, that it is in a way inept or has difficulties to do it. So this is where I see a really good chance for early childhood. Why? Because I think that early childhood, first of all, addresses many of the issues that actually schools don't manage to address. Just to give you a few examples, it combines care and education. And those who know me, they know that in every single presentation I say it. Care is not only for children under 6. I was teaching secondary school children. At the age of 16, you need a lot of care. So care and education is for all. This is a priority in early childhood. It's not a priority in education. It's said it's a priority, but it's not. Or formative assessment, observation, then working with the parents, working with the community. So there are lots of entry points that actually you are trying to do in the early childhood field, not just trying, you also manage, and that the school field would also like to do and doesn't manage to do. So this is then, let's say, the niche where you can enter the system. And then, of course, this theory could then also help that early childhood would like to be part of education, but wouldn't like to become part of the school. So the idea is it should enter the education system in a way so that it transforms it. And it is, according to the theory of disruptive innovation, it is very important that the disruption doesn't become crammed into the existing system, but that the possibility for disruption remains within the system, right? So for that, it is obvious that it is very, very important, and now I will go to the second part of my talk, how governance is organized. How do you govern a system where this innovation is possible? So what is governance? This is more, let's say, a definition that the social sciences and the education field would use. And it emphasizes that governance is really about a process. It's about an interaction between many players for trying to taking decisions and trying to find solutions for problems. So really, the most important when we talk about good governance is that it is not even the quality of the decision, but it is the quality of the process to take a good decision. So a few adjectives that come to mind when we talk about good governance are that it is transparent, that it is participatory, that it is inclusive, that it is effective, that it is legitimate, that it is accountable. Now, these are very beautiful words and theories, and then when we look at how at the moment early childhood is governed, I will now show you two maps, which is actually about the funding systems within the EU, according to central, regional, local level, and then also according to public and private players. And what I want to illustrate, I will describe a bit what you see, but the main point is that it is really very, very diverse, that the money comes from very different people, and so that it is as a result, extremely complicated to take good decisions and to really serve the purposes that we would like to serve. So the first slide is about how funding is organized for under 3s and over 3s. And you can see that generally within the systems have the same kind of pattern, both for under 3s and over 3s, but still there is a tendency that as the children get older, the central level becomes more important. And you see, like the case of the UK, that let's say for under 3s there is no public subsidy at all. The most typical in all situations is a combination of central and local level. when we look at the combination of public and private funding, and I'm always talking about center-based, but of course, part of the fragmented picture is that there are also a lot of services that are not center-based, that are not regulated, and they also exist, and they also serve children. So this is not even part of this complicated map. I am just telling you to make it even more complicated. But we are talking about complexity. So now we can see that here for the, so there is public, private, but within the private we have publicly subsidized private, which is very characteristic for the Nordic countries, and then we have really private unsubsidized. We see that the public is of course more prevailing in the, again, for the older children. We know this pattern, but actually we see that there are a lot of countries that had public and private for the younger, and then it's all sectors involved already for the older. And it's also because the money, the resources that we need are actually even more substantial. And but about 30% of the under trees comes from private sources, and then as the children get older, it's rather around 17%, 15-17%. This is latest OECD data. And there is also in the funding, you have to see what is funded from where. So public funding is generally more for infrastructure, for teacher salaries, for books. And then the private, it's about meals, health, transport. So there are the core and the additional funding. So they come, there is also a division among these two. So I hope I managed to show you that the picture is extremely complex. So how do you disrupt a system like that? How can you create a new value network? Because this is what we said, this is what a disruptive innovation is about. I would give you here an example from the study that is actually, I think it illustrates very well what we can mean by disruptive innovation in education, through the story of the core study that I think all of you know, because it is the base of this conference. So this idea of a competent system comes from the core study. The call for the core study was written by the Director General responsible for education and culture, and the basic idea behind the core was that we talk about competence-based education in schools, right? And we can see now many countries already have curricula that are competence-based, and still education is not competence-based. And this is because, of course, we now say we blame the teachers because they don't have the right competencies, okay? So the problem is we need competence profiles also for the teachers, and we need that the teachers are prepared for that job that they have to practice afterwards, and that they are not. So this was one reason that we saw that this qualification-based thinking about the teachers wasn't really the right one. The other one was that in the early childhood field, we knew that a very big percentage of the staff is not qualified. So looking at qualification levels and then having a research showing that 50% is not qualified, for that it's really not worth doing a research. So this is why we said, let's do a study on the competence requirements of staff. And that study, as I am sure all of you know, definitely the authors know, but I'm sure those who wrote it also know it, that showed very well which countries have competence profiles for the settings, which countries have competence profiles for the training centers who train the staff, and what is the relationship between the competence profiles of the setting and of the training center, and very often I think they found that there wasn't a relationship or that one of the competence profiles was missing. So then from this research, we had the results, or we about a competent system that identified actually competencies on an individual level, on an institutional level, on an interinstitutional level, and on state level. So it basically showed how you can build a system not on qualifications but on competencies, and that actually it also showed good practices about how you can acquire the competencies, maybe not through going through courses, but being in a team or working somewhere. And so this kind of thinking, if you want, is a disruptive innovation. And what I was already implying when I said why we commissioned the research was because this is something that is also lacking in the school system. So this is, for instance, something that the early childhood field can teach. The idea of a competent system is very important also for the school system. So this is a way of creating a new value network that then can exist beside or even as part of the existing value network, which is the schools. Another important thing that we should emphasize is that the Clayton Christensen talks about lightweight and heavyweight teams. Lightweight teams are the people who just run the system according to the regulations that already exist. Heavyweight team are people representing different organizations, but they are able to step beyond their organizations to think together about how to knit the system together in a different way. And here in these systems, you have many players who could step out of their let's say, organizations and think about it, how to knit the system better together. And then this will help to govern a complex system. I will now give on the next slide, give you a few features of what are the main characteristics of governance in a complex system. The ideas are not mine. They are coming from an OECD SERI study that actually had 2 volumes that was finished last year, and it's called Governing Education Systems in a Complex World. And I think it summarizes very well the most important features that we have to keep in mind when organizing complex governance systems. So the first thing that it says is that it focuses on the process and not on the structure. So it is very important that we align the process across the system, and we align the processes that involve the different actors. The next thing is that it is a flexible system that is able to adapt to change. Here, what is very important is that there is a regular feedback in the system that helps it to remain quality assured and accountable. A third one is that it works through capacity building and stakeholder involvement and open dialogue. But for that, it has to be really structured. There has to be structured spaces to organize that. It requires a whole system approach. These are words you said in the last 2.5 days, I'm sure, coming from the practice and thinking about how to take it on a policy level. So, and this really helps. When you have a whole system approach, it helps you to align policies, the different roles and responsibilities, to have a good trade-off between accountability and trust, between risk-taking, risk-aversity and innovation. These if you think about the whole system always, then it helps you to keep these things in balance. And then finally, it's also very important that it harnesses on evidence and research to inform the policy. And here, I would like to say, and I am now not going to talk about this at length, but this is the topic maybe one of the topics I'm most interested in, is the quality of the education research, that it really has to become better and more digestible for policymakers. And I think this happens partly or only also through dialogue with the policymakers, so that you really understand what he's looking for and what you are looking for, and that he also understands you. This we are aware of. But it also depends on the quality of the data. We know that, yes, we say we lack data. Yes, we do lack data, that is true. But it's also, we work very much with correlations. Sometimes these correlations are very random, so we really need to have strong correlations. And when there are anomalies, then we really have to find out why that is. So we really have to look at the context. And why do we need that? Because when we want to understand what works, we also want to understand what works, but why does it work? For whom does it work? This is also very, very important, because it doesn't work for everyone. And this actually, in this context of local versus global, how we can use each other's practices in our own, and why didn't it work, and why can the Scandinavians do it and we can't, and this, whatever. It can help to make much more nuanced answers. So I really think the quality of the research needs to improve to have really evidence-based, good evidence-based policy making. That's fine. So this is, again, it seems like really nice theory, and actually we mentioned all these things, and it still doesn't seem to work always. So let's go one level further and to say, okay, but what kind of governance tools can we use so that these things really happen? And here, I think we very often see it's very difficult. We can always say, we need more teacher training, we need more funding. We say these things, but actually what really matters is that we have a clear vision, where do we want to go, and what are the steps that we want to take to get there. And until we don't know the answer on this, we can talk about participation, funding, and training. It will never work. Now, these 4 tools are tools that you can use in different contexts. And Christensen actually represents it in a Cartesian coordinate system, which I actually wanted to put on the slide, but it was so complicated that I decided not to, but I have it, so if we have time I can show it to you. But the main point is, on the vertical axis, you say, to which extent do you agree which way to go? And on the horizontal one, you say, through which steps shall we go there? Now, in different contexts, you will find where the system stands. When the system stands at the point where there is no agreement where to go, and there is no agreement how to go there, then you use power tools. That is, you use regulations, you control. When you know where to go, but you don't agree on the steps, then you need very strong leadership. You need a leader who has a vision, or a group of people who has a vision, who have charisma, and who will say, we're going that way now. And then when there is agreement on the steps, but not really on which way to go, so it's much more, then you need management tools. Then you measure, then you train, you have strategies. And when both work, then you can use the cultural tools. This is when democracy really works, when you agree on both of them. Now, it doesn't mean that, okay, so now I look at this and then I think about the country. I come from Hungary, which one would work there? I don't want to go there now. Which one would work right now in Hungary? But what I'm saying is that in different situations, so it can be one system in different moments in time, in different in different contexts, a different one will work. But it doesn't mean that for one country or for one organization, you always have to use one. But you have to see where you are standing. So when you, and I'm saying this because we talk a lot about open dialogue and participation, and yes, but sometimes it doesn't, sometimes we have to stop the participation, and we have to say, yes, now we have participated and we have decided, and now we go that way, and I take responsibility, and we go that way. So this is very, very important. And why is it also important? And I think nowadays, particularly in the political climate in which we live, I think having again trust in these institutions is extremely important. And for that, the system needs to be really responsive to the demands. And it also has to deliver, and it has to deliver according to certain values, because otherwise trust will not work. And if trust doesn't work, then actually the whole system will not work. Because I'm sure, and I heard it in the sessions where I was, that the word trust is always part of the conversation, that without that we will not make it. So then so in the second part, I tried to show to you what kind of governance methods might work and might give way to innovation, and give possibility to also keep the system that way, that innovation can happen over and over again, so that it doesn't become stifled. So now, what is the role of the European Union in this? And here again, I know that the reputation of the EU is not at its highest point, although Brexit has really helped, and the results of the Brexit referendum have really, we know, pushed the polls into a bit more pro-European thinking again in many, many member states. And we also know that actually this doesn't really help us at European level, but that the trust in national policymakers has decreased even more. So maybe we still have a bit of chance at European level. And actually I have to say that the President's speech of the State of the European Union now in September was really encouraging. So he really seems to want to take things forward and sees that this is now really a possibility, and that we shouldn't wait any longer, and that we should do things, and that we can do now things, because maybe there is a niche to act. Now, when we go back to education, what can we do there? I really think that because education, and actually also social policy, you know, is not a field at European level where we can have regulations and basically naming and shaming. We rather have soft policy tools. We have a lot of room for innovation and for disruptive innovation. We can create new value networks. We can create heavyweight teams because we have several policy tools to do that. So the framework that was mentioned in the introduction that we did with the member states, it was actually done with representatives of member states. If you like, they were a heavyweight team representing their own country and creating a network, a framework, a policy tool that can be then used in very, very different contexts. So in a way, the European space allows for disruptive innovation. We can define together policy priorities. We can develop strategies together. There is still a level of political debate about it in the Council, so member states still have to accept recommendations, which are not binding, but still they show a direction for the member states if they want to take it up or not. And of course, the funding programs can help a lot to take those innovations further at national level. And then there are other tools like platforms. I don't know whether you are familiar, for instance, with the e-twinning platform that was designed originally for schools to create projects together across countries on a virtual platform. And now early childhood settings can be also part of that. the concrete example of the policy framework as a disruptive tool this is what I would like to talk to you about a bit. This is the structure of the framework. I think most of you are already familiar with it. Just to say a few words. So the 4 main principles are around this image and voice of the child, the partnership with the parents and with between the different organizations, the emphasis on process quality, and that we talk about the competent system, not only about competent individuals. We identify 5 main policy areas in which we defined 2 principles each that we found the most important for developing quality. And what is important is that the center of the thinking is the child. It's not the school. It's not to improve the preschool. It's to improve the life chances and the lives of children and their families. And this to do through quality that is informed by high expectations, and high expectations meaning help everyone to reach their own potential. And the framework allows for different starting points and for multidisciplinary and multi-agency work. And what we have, there is a mapping report with people sitting here in the audience for the Commission, and there we can already see how countries have taken this up. Although it is not even, it's a technical document, it was not accepted yet as an official European Commission document. Still, it was already used in many, many countries for mapping the state of play in the systems, for thinking about let's say new curriculum design, or new kind of teacher training, so for developing new policies. So it was already taken up in many, many different ways, and because it is flexible, it can be used in very, very different ways for very different purposes, and it can bring together many, many players in the countries, and I think that is one of its real strengths. So this is a really good example of what, for instance, can be done at European level in terms of disruptive innovation. And now just to say, because yes, it's true, it's a baby for me, just to say how it is doing right now, that now the Commission is actually developing indicators and to make it even more concrete. And I think what is even more important, that shows that it also, the interagency work and the understanding that it's very important that the EU is now having several initiatives on the future of social Europe. There is a whole reflection process about the future of Europe, within that about the social dimension of Europe. And there is a proposal for a European pillar of social rights that should be a framework for future social policies. It's called a pillar because it should be one of the pillars of the economic and monetary union, although they would like to use this pillar also for countries outside the Eurozone, also because they think that, or we think that slowly all countries will be part of the Eurozone. So this pillar identifies 20 basically principles, but they are basically individual rights for people to have rights to education, to quality work and quality working conditions, and to social protection. And within that, one of the principles is the right to good quality early childhood education and care for all, and actually even referring to the quality criteria identified in this framework. At the moment, this is on negotiation between Council, Parliament and the Commission, but anyway, this could be a frame and it could be then taken forward, and it's very important that there already we can see education and social policy working together. So, to close my talk, I would then just summarize a few ideas and maybe tell you a few things that I maybe you can think about Monday when you go back to your office. What day is today? Yes, you will go back on Monday. So that we can see that what is important about the competence system is that it can really deal with complexity. And this kind of systems then give way to innovation both locally and globally. And like we saw in the music, there is disruption happening. Innovation can be disruptive, and it can lead to diversity. But if you have participation, like you saw the choir, and if you have a good leader who was the conductor, it can become coherent. So I think it is feasible. And I really think, and I really say this from my heart, that I really think people in early childhood education and care do absolutely excellent work. And I know that it is very hard because it is always a bit regarded as an orphan when we talk about schools and compared to the education system. But I really think you are doing a wonderful job. I have learned personally a huge amount from you. And so I would maybe leave you with 3 words, which is iteration, so do things better, innovation, so do new things, and disruption, do new things so that you make the old ones obsolete. And you should really continue on this path. And I would like to thank you for your attention.